QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces, scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Here are the top stories. The whole of the UK is bracing for severe weather this evening, with gusts of up to 90 miles an hour expected to cause havoc. 2 amber wind alerts are in place as Storm Isha hits Britain. Forecasters say there's a danger to life in some areas, warning of falling trees, power cuts and possible flooding. People are being urged not to travel and delays and cancellations are expected. Speed restrictions are now in place across Network Rail, and ScotRail expects all services to be suspended on Monday morning. While our South West England reporter Jeff Moody says conditions are expected to get worse tonight.
The storm's really beginning to take effect now. The wind is really beginning to pick up. The rain has arrived too, and it's going to get a whole lot worse tonight. This is the 9th named storm of the season, and what makes this one unique is it's going to affect the whole of the UK. The Met Office is saying make sure that everything in your garden is secured, fixed down. The risk from flying debris is very, very real indeed. Avoid coastal paths and avoid rural paths too. The best thing you can do is to stay indoors.
Well, flights coming into London's Heathrow Airport are experiencing some shaky landings. The windy conditions are creating frightening conditions for passengers, with several flights spotted looking unsteady as they descended into Britain's main airport. Some flights have also been cancelled. Labour says the government's Rwanda bill won't act as a deterrent to migrants entering Britain illegally. The plan would see asylum seekers arriving in the UK sent to Rwanda to have their claims processed. Speaking to GB News presenter Camilla Tominey, Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnick said tackling the crisis depends upon international cooperation.
There's no way that shipping perhaps 1% of the number of people that come across the channel on small boats to Rwanda is ever going to act as a deterrent. You're dealing with people who are fleeing violence and persecution. By stopping wasting so much time on Rwanda, which is just a gimmick that is doomed to failure, let's plough much more resource and time and energy into doing some of the things that have worked, like the Albania deal. We fully support the Albania deal, and that has worked as a deterrent.
A murder investigation is underway after a teenager was stabbed in Birmingham city centre. West Midlands police say officers were called to Victoria Square after the 17-year-old was found seriously injured yesterday. He was rushed to hospital but later died. Anyone who may have taken pictures in the area around the river statue on Saturday afternoon is being urged to contact police. There's been an explosion at a major gas terminal in the Baltic Sea near Russia in a suspected drone strike from Ukraine. Firefighters are battling flames at the site after reports from Ukrainian media suggest a special operation was carried out by security services. Ukraine's government has not claimed responsibility. Novatek is Russia's largest natural gas producer. It's now been forced to stop operations at the site. The Royal Navy's defences are to be boosted with £405 million of funding amid escalating global tensions. Missiles that have been used to defend ships in the Red Sea will be upgraded, making it the UK's most capable naval air defence system ever developed. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps told GB News that Britain is taking a lead.
We're investing £288 billion over the next decade to make sure that we do pump more money into our military, into our equipment, and that we can safely defend ourselves. And Britain's leading the way, as I said, in Ukraine, but actually also this week I announced an operation in Europe called Steadfast Defender, which is a NATO operation, which the United Kingdom's providing 40% of the ground troops and 50% of the overall personnel, even though there were 32 countries in total involved in this. So we really are leading from the front in the UK.
The skies above Berlin were lit up last night as a rare meteor was spotted. Researcher Michael I, who managed to capture the moment on camera, told reporters he was just about to take his dog for a walk when a colleague told him to keep his eyes on the sky. Experts say it's only the 8th time it's ever been possible to predict the exact time of a meteor. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. Just say play GB News. Now it's time for the Camilla Tominey Show.
Good morning to you. Welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. It's been another busy week for us in Westminster. Rishi Sunak did just about get his Rwanda bill through the House of Commons despite opposition from left and right. The controversial legislation is now set to go to the House of Lords, but with some peers threatening sabotage, will it remain intact? I'll be asking exactly that of Defence Secretary Grant Shapps, who will also give us an update on the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. I'll also be joined by Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnick. What's Labour's plan to stop the boats? I'll be speaking to Robert Jenrick, the man who resigned as Immigration Minister after saying the legislation just wasn't tough enough. And after both the King and the Princess of Wales revealed health problems this week, I'll speak to an authority on all things royal, the author and journalist Robert Hardman. Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, joins me now. He's also the Tory MP for Welwyn Hatfield. Mr Shapps, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for sparing the time. The chair of NATO's military committee, Dutch Admiral Rob Bauer, has given a strong indication that NATO could be at war with Russia within 20 years. Do you agree with that assessment?
I mean, the truth of the matter is, as I said in my speech on Monday at Lancaster House here in London, and the comments from NATO are really reflecting or echoing that, is no one really knows, which is why we need to be prepared for whatever comes. I don't think it's inevitable. I think it depends, in no small part, on what happens with Putin in Ukraine, where he simply cannot be allowed to win that war, where he walked in on a democratic neighbour and invaded, and our response is part of making sure that he doesn't feel that he's emboldened enough to go to war.
Are we well prepared enough, though? I note General Lord Dannatt, who of course was the former chief of the General Staff, he said, quote, "The woeful state of our armed forces in the mid-1930s failed to deter Hitler or prevent the Second World War and the Holocaust. There is a serious danger of history repeating itself. The government or the next one should commit now to spending 3% of GDP on defence." He's not wrong, is he? At the moment, I believe you're at 2.1%. You need to get to 2.5. But surely, in light of the threat not just from Russia, but also China and what's going on in the Red Sea right now, defence spending should be at 3%, shouldn't it, Minister?
Well, our defence spending is the largest it's ever been at over £50 billion, and it's about 2.25% probably right now. And we agree it needs to go higher. In fact, the government's committed, as conditions allow, to go to 2.5%, and we think that is absolutely right to go in that. In fact, my entire speech on Monday was about this subject, about how we prepare for what is undoubtedly a more dangerous world. So you're seeing everybody commenting in different ways about the state of the world, NATO, Richard Dannett there, as you just mentioned, and myself on Monday, we're all concerned that we need to have that plan in place, and we have a plan, and we're investing 288 billion pounds over the next decade to make sure that we do pump more money into our military, into our equipment, and that we can safely defend ourselves. And Britain's leading the way, as I said, in Ukraine, but actually also this week I announced an operation in Europe called Steadfast Defender, which is a NATO operation, which the United Kingdom's providing 40% of the ground troops and 50% of the overall personnel, even though there were 32 countries in total involved in this.
Your colleague Robert Jenrick has called for both the Houthis and indeed the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps both to be prescribed as terrorist groups. What's your reaction to that?
Well, we always keep prescription under very, very close review. There are always pros and cons with doing this. You lose diplomatic relations and that type of thing. When it comes to the Houthis in particular, and as I say, I've just been down to the Red Sea, they don't have very much connectivity to this country in the same way, but we'll look at that very carefully. We are already ensuring that we have quite a number of their individual leaders who are already sanctioned in this country. But I know the Home Secretary will be looking at all of that very carefully indeed.
I mean, isn't Iran at the root of a lot of these problems? What's the UK doing about Iran in general?
Yes, if you look at that situation throughout the region, throughout the Middle East, you've got the Iranian-backed Houthis, you've got Lebanese Hezbollah, you've got Hamas themselves trained by Iran, you've got militant groups in Iraq and in Syria. They are firmly behind a lot of these problems, and we are increasing our pressure on them. In fact, because there are diplomatic relations, for example, the Foreign Secretary has been speaking to his Iranian opposite number and saying, you have to put a lid on this. We understand.
Well, is he listening?
They tell us that they don't want to see this conflict. Clearly not when it comes to the Houthis, for example, and it's a very, very dangerous game for them to be playing. And we are calling on them and others like China who have an interest, for example, particularly in the trade that comes through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, to make that message particularly clear to the Iranians that no good can come of this, and they need to calm and cool the situation in the region.
If unelected peers try and block the Rwanda bill through the House of Lords, do you think the government should consider reforming the House of Lords?
Well, look, the people I'm most concerned about who will block it in there are Keir Starmer's Labour Party. We don't have a majority in the House of Lords because Labour can block us in coalition with the Lib Dems. So the person who can unblock this in the Lords, rather than saying peers are blocking it, it's Labour who'll be blocking it. They're blocking it, but they can't say what they would do about these small boats. They don't even have a plan. We have a plan. We're carrying it out. We've seen the number of small boats crossings being slashed by 36% this year, which has been exceptional. We'd like to go further. We think the Rwanda plan is part of that. Keir Starmer has no plan. He'll take us right back to square one. He even said last week on television that even if the Rwanda plan is working in stopping the small boats, he would still overturn it if we were to get elected. He has no plan. He'd take us back to square one.
Although square this circle for us, please, Mr. Shapps. On one hand, you've introduced a Rwanda bill to act as a deterrent to people coming here by illegal boat crossing, claiming asylum. You say they're economic migrants. We now understand, according to a front-page story on The Telegraph yesterday, that 16,000 asylum seekers who came here illegally have been allowed to work. What message does that send out to people who are paying people smugglers thousands to come here? On one hand, it's meant to be a deterrent, this bill. On the other, people are coming here illegally and you're handing them work.
Well, look, I don't know the specifics of that individual situation.
Well, those are the specifics. I've just stated them.
Sure. What I was going to say is, what I do know for sure is that we have taken measure after measure, including multiple bills through Parliament, in order to try to crack down on this problem. Not without success, as I say, a slash of well over a third in terms of the numbers travelling here by small boats in 2023. So it's been working. Every single thing that we have done has been absolutely opposed by the lawyer Keir Starmer, who has spent his entire career defending what he calls the human rights of people who are being people trafficked illegally, dangerously by gangs of people smugglers.
But 16,000 of them have been handed jobs. So we spoke earlier, I spoke to Patrick O'Flynn, my paper reviewer, about the response to that by a Telegraph reader to this story. A man called Matthew McKay, he said he was 58 years old, he's from a white working class family, he's got 3 children, his wife's a care worker. He said, can anybody tell me why I bother? What is the point of working when so many, now including illegal immigrants, seem to be respected more and certainly looked after better? What is the point in getting up every morning and trying to look after my country when my country has turned its back on hard-working people like me? He's right, isn't he, Minister?
No, I don't think that is a fair reflection at all. We have record low unemployment in this country, record high levels of employment. There are jobs, in fact, we were just talking about the lack of, the problems of recruiting a few moments ago. There are jobs for people in this country. We also have developed, as I say, in terms of that illegal migration, those small boats, a whole series of different bills, acts of law,
but why
in
is
order
the government
to prevent this illegal crossing.
Illegal migrants to work? Is it because, as we all suspect, the Home Office is a basket case and can't keep track of half these people?
Well, look, as I say, I don't know the specific answers to that particular cohort that you've referenced.
Well, should they be working, these illegal migrants?
But what I do know is that we have consistently tightened up the rules to make sure that that people can't come here and then claim asylum if they are in fact economic migrants, and that is a very, very key point, all of which will be overturned by Keir Starmer and the Labour Party because they have forced us tooth and nail. They can't say what they would do. They don't have a plan to sort it out.
I know,
they
but
take
you
us
can't
back to
answer
square
my
one.
question.
But they're very happy to tell their... Well, I'm afraid...
I'm going to try for a final time. I'm going to try a final...
You can, but...
Just a final time, Mr Shapps. Should people coming here illegally by boat be allowed to work? Yes or no?
I think the answer... I think in general the answer is clearly no, because if they're illegal migrants, I don't know the specifics of the case, which I've been very, very clear about, but I do think in the principle, what lies behind this
Mr Shapps, we need to leave it there.
Be very clear about not allowing people to come here illegally, and that's been fought against by Keir Starmer.
Thank you so much for your time this morning, Defence Secretary. Next to come up on the show will be Stephen Kinnick, who's going to give us Labour's answers to Rwanda. Don't go anywhere. Be back in a jiffy.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. Storm Isha will bring some very heavy rain and some strong winds across the UK overnight tonight and into Monday morning. It pushes its way north and eastwards across western parts of Scotland this evening, bringing some very heavy rain, particularly to those western parts of the UK. That rain will continue to push its way north and eastwards through the evening and overnight, and it's through the early hours of Monday morning that those winds really start to pick up. Gusts of 60 to 75 miles an hour across those western coasts, perhaps as high as 90 across parts of Scotland. It will be a very mild night as well, particularly compared to what we've seen recently, maybe 8 or 9 degrees across the southeast. A very windy start to the day on Monday, though. Those winds will ease a touch through the early hours of the morning, but still remaining very blustery across the UK into Monday afternoon. Showers quite widely pushing in from the west into Monday afternoon as well, perhaps turning wintry across the very high ground of Scotland. There will be some sunshine across the very far southeast. Temperatures here maybe 10 or 11 degrees, and elsewhere around the mid-single figures. Tuesday will start a little bit drier for some, particularly along eastern parts of England, but that doesn't last very long. This next system pushing in from the west as we go through Tuesday afternoon, bringing some further heavy rain, particularly to western parts of Scotland, northwest England and into Wales as well, and some strong winds associated with that. Something a little drier on Wednesday, but further wet and windy weather later in the week.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Still lots more to come. In just a minute, I'm going to be speaking to Stephen Kinnick, Shadow Immigration Minister. Robert Jenrick, former Immigration Minister who resigned over the government's Rwanda bill, was also joining me in the studio. I'll be speaking to Lord Alex Carlisle. He's a crossbench peer. Will he try and frustrate the Rwanda bill as it passes into the House of Lords? And the Labour MP Barry Gardiner is going to be joining me to discuss why he thinks leaseholds should be scrapped. And Robert Hardman, the royal expert who's written the book everyone is talking about, will also be in the studio. So a jam-packed show still for the next hour. Don't go anywhere. Stephen Kinnick, Shadow Immigration Minister and the Labour MP for Aberfon, also joins me now in the studio. The Tata Steel plant in Port Talbot is in his constituency. I'm going to ask you about that in just a moment, Stephen. First of all, I don't know if you did catch Grant Shapps, because I know you were doing other interviews this morning. The Defence Secretary basically saying if the Rwanda bill fails in the House of Lords, it's all Labour's fault.
Well, this is typical of what we hear from Conservative ministers. They just want to blame everybody.
Well, it's not wrong if you block it. I mean, you know, you've got an elected government who's got this legislation through, albeit the rebellion that was threatened didn't materialise. So, democratically speaking, it should go through the House of Lords unchallenged by Labour, shouldn't it?
But they're constantly trying to blame everyone rather than take responsibility. They blame Labour, they blame lawyers, they blame judges, they blame the European Union, they blame anyone rather than taking responsibility. They are the government of the day. They have a majority in the Lords and a majority in the Commons. So this idea that we block things is complete nonsense.
But they're saying that you are blocking their attempts to stop the boats. I mean, presumably you do want want to stop the boats. Labour wants to stop the boats.
100%, of course.
Therefore, you should support the legislation that's been designed to do that. You should probably be encouraged, in fact, that some of the righties of the Tory party didn't succeed in their amendments, which would have toughened the law up. Actually, it was supported by the One Nation group that are more left-leaning in the Tory party. That should make the Labour Party happy, that it's not the sort of right-wing legislation that people feared, that it's a bit softer, and therefore it should go through the upper chamber unchallenged. Because you want to stop the boats.
Well, we voted against the right-wing amendments that came forward because they would be undermining Britain's commitment to the rule of law, and we would never support that. This bill will be treated like any other bill in the House of Lords. The job of the House of Lords is to scrutinise. It's a revising chamber. It looks at legislation and it seeks to point out its weaknesses and looks to improve them. But at the end of the day, every bill that goes through...
against the will of the people here, would you? I mean, it's a democratically elected government that's come up with this legislation. The Labour Party's called, I believe, for the House of Lords to be scrapped in the past. So you wouldn't want to be supporting unelected peers blocking legislation that's going to stop the boats, would you?
Their job is to scrutinise and to revise and seek to improve. But if you look at things like the illegal migration bill, a complete and utter waste of time that's been totally counterproductive, and the government hasn't even enacted the bill because it just makes everything worse. But we didn't block it. I mean, it went through in the end. There was a lot of, in the parliamentary term, ping-pong, where the two chambers talk to each other, seek to amend, seek to revise, but at the end of the day, the government has a majority in the Commons and a majority in the Lords. So, frankly, all of this is just a big red herring because the government never wants to take responsibility for its own actions and its own failures.
I mean, at the moment, you all seem to be sort of attributing a great deal of responsibility to the House of Lords to sort of scrutinise and change and make better legislation. But hang on a minute, Labour wants to scrap the House of Lords. So why are you supporting the House of Lords doing anything with this bill if you don't want these peers to be there in the first place?
Well, we have a system based on parliamentary democracy. There are two chambers. There's the House of Lords and the House of Commons.
Chamber, right?
Well, we've made it clear under the Gordon Brown review that we want to review and look at different options. There are clearly serious questions about the democratic legitimacy of that House of Lords.
Okay, so you don't want these Lords exercising too much power then?
But where we are now, in terms of having a House of Lords with the function that it has in our parliamentary democratic system, is its job is to scrutinise and revise. Now, we can have a debate about whether or not we should have the House of Lords at all, or whether it should be a democratically elected chamber. But where we are today, it has a job to do, which is to scrutinise legislation, and it will scrutinise the Rwanda bill like any other bill, but there won't be any special measures for it, any special consideration.
Eventually,
it will go through in the usual way.
Lords, do you think? If Labour are in power, would you move towards and support a campaign to scrap the House of Lords?
If we are fortunate enough to win the next general election, there's going to be a huge number of things to do because we'll be inheriting a disaster. Disaster on the economy.
Would that be one of them, the House of Lords?
7.8 million people on NHS waiting list. Public services crumbling.
I'm noting that you're not answering my question. Would you look to scrapping the House of Lords, yes or no?
It is something that we're looking at, and we're reviewing, but it will not be a priority because of the disaster we'll be inheriting.
When it comes to Labour's deterrent, I know what you've been saying, and Yvette Cooper, your colleague, has been saying about, you know, trying to smash the smuggling gangs. I mean, these are pan-European criminals, seemingly kind of, you know, taking the law for a ride, to be perfectly honest, because we heard at the weekend stories of migrants paying up to £10,000 for more robust seafaring vessels to take them across the Channel, even though you and I know that that could be a recipe for disaster. So you must at least appreciate the bill's capacity to perhaps act as a deterrent.
It doesn't have any chance of being a deterrent.
What deterrent would Labour introduce then?
Well, just on the bill, there's no way that shipping perhaps 1% of the number of people that come across the Channel on small boats to Rwanda is ever going to act as a deterrent. You're dealing with people who are fleeing violence and persecution, have often risked life and limb to cross continents.
But rather than criticising the Conservatives, what's your policy? What's your deterrent?
So by stopping wasting so much time on Rwanda, which is just a gimmick that is doomed to failure, let's plough much more resource and time and energy into doing some of the things that have worked, like the Albania deal. We fully support the Albania deal, and that has worked as a deterrent.
Look, you're not at risk of persecution. It's ludicrous for you to be seeking asylum. Don't do it. Which other countries would you like to see an Albania-style deal with? Who's coming here that shouldn't come here, Mr. Kinnick?
Well, we're seeing large numbers of Indians coming across. We've supported the government on making India a safe country. People also coming from countries like Georgia. We've supported the government making Georgia a safe country. So there are many more deals you can do to facilitate removals. But of course, removals from our country have dropped by 30% since 2010. If you're not removing people who failed to get asylum, then the entire system gets clogged up, and that's one of the reasons we have this massive backlog.
What do you make of this 16,000 people who arrived here illegally and then were given work?
Well, one of the reasons you get that is because of the huge backlog. The more you have more people... In 2005, the decision was taken to allow people to work after 12 months. Nobody should be waiting for their asylum claim to be processed for more than 6 months.
Well, what would you do
we
with
would
the
do is
Home
get
Office,
we would get the asylum backlog down, and we would get the time that it takes to be processed down to 6 months. By a huge investment in immigration enforcement, 1,000 new officers going into a new returns unit.
How quickly
so you're getting
could they
people
be
out.
recruited?
We would be ramping that up from day one of a Labour government.
So how quickly would you get 1,000 in place, do you think?
I think it takes about 6 months to get up to that number, and then, of course, a little bit of time for training, but eventually you've got a situation where you're getting the backlog down through removals, and you are processing people far more quickly. We would surge 1,250 new caseworkers and decision makers, and that gets people out of the system well under the 12-month time period after which you're allowed to work. So the reason that people are coming into the labour market in this way is because of the backlog. You've got to deal with the causes of the issue, not just the symptoms.
They're economic migrants, not asylum seekers, though. I mean, Yvette Cooper seems to think that anybody coming by boat is ergo an asylum seeker. That's wrong, isn't it?
No, if you get asylum, you apply for asylum. If you're granted asylum, you get leave to remain, and you have the right to work. And I think we want that. We want people who are genuine asylum seekers and genuine refugees contributing to our economy, and often they end up contributing huge amounts to our society and to our economy. But it can't be done through the back door. It has to be based on a robust and rapid processing system.
Quick final question on Port Talbot, because it is in your constituency. On one hand, Labour have said, it's an outrage. The closing down of these steelworks is going to cost 2,800 jobs, yet it's being done for the very reason that Labour is pushing. It's being done to meet this net zero target. So you can't have it both ways, can you? You can't have your cake and eat it, push for net zero and then complain about job losses.
Well, the problem is this deal that the government has done with Tata Steel has got nothing to do with decarbonisation, because it's based on importing millions of tonnes of steel from India.
I know, but every time the government's come up with a net zero target, you've been backing it. And then some. You want net zero on steroids, don't you?
We support decarbonisation. We feel that the planet is burning, but we also see that decarbonisation can create jobs. But you can't have a deal which is based on importing millions of tonnes of steel from India, where steel making is 30 to 40% more carbon intensive than in the United Kingdom. The deal that the Tata Steel has done with the government is the wrong deal. It's a bad deal. They should back the compelling multi-union deal and back Labour's £3 billion clean steel fund, which would work in partnership with our steel makers to get us to it's a bridge to a future rather than a cliff edge.
Although very quickly we find that your Green Prosperity Plan now, Labour insiders are saying, don't mention the 28 billion because you're not able to commit to that pledge.
I don't know where those lines have come from. We are committed to ramping up to 28 billion in the second half of our first Labour term. Of course, it takes some time to identify the right projects and invest in the right way. And a big part of the 28 billion, of course, is the £3 billion clean steel fund. One example of what we'll do in terms of driving decarbonisation without deindustrialisation.
Thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning, Stephen Kinnick. Don't go anywhere, because after the break I'm going to be speaking to Robert Jenrick, the man who quit as immigration minister because he thought the government's Rwanda plan didn't go far enough. Don't go anywhere.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Thank you for your company this Sunday morning. Robert Jenrick joins me now. He was the Immigration Minister before his resignation over the Rwanda bill. He's also Tory MP for Newark. Robert, lovely to see you this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
I'm interested in your political journey. On one hand, you sort of came into Cabinet because you were Rishi Sunak ally, and now you seem to have done a pivot towards Suella Braverman, sort of siding with the right of the party. How's that come about?
Well, I've always believed very strongly on these issues, particularly on immigration. I think that illegal migration is doing untold damage to our country, and the stakes are extremely high, and we have to take action. And legal migration was a promise that we made, not just in our last manifesto, but in every manifesto for nigh on 30 years. And yet we're living in a country where 750,000 people are coming in legally every year. And so on these two issues and others, I feel extremely strongly, and we need to take greater action as a government to protect the country from this great challenge.
But you're saying that this Rwanda bill isn't tough enough. I mean, obviously there's been warnings from the likes of Isaac Levido and others about the Conservatives' campaign for the general election being undermined by people like you. You know, it's unite or die. You can understand that perspective. I mean, the bill's gone through, this rebellion fizzled out. Why was that?
Well, look, I will continue to make the argument. You're right to say that the government won the votes in the House of Commons, and the amendments that I put forward were ultimately unsuccessful. I chose to vote against the bill because I felt that it's a weak bill that ultimately won't work. And we will have to see now if in August there are still small boats crossing the channel, then it will be shown that my argument was right and the government's was wrong. But I hope, of course, that the Prime Minister is successful, because I want to see the small boats stop. I think this is doing immense damage. Think of the hotels, the billions of pounds are being wasted, the people who are dying in the Channel, the people smugglers that are feasting on this appalling trade. I want to see the small boats stop. I believe that the way to do that is through the most robust action, and that view is formed having travelled around the world, having seen that the only countries in the world that have fixed this problem, Australia and Greece in recent years, chose to take the hardest path. That's what I was proposing. The Prime Minister ultimately wanted to do a different way. Why do you think the Prime Minister wouldn't listen to you? I mean, you and Suella were at the sharp end of things at the Home Office. I mean, is it poor leadership skills? Is it a lack of understanding of the electoral calamity he faces with the threat from reform? What is he pig-headed? What's the answer? I think you have to ask him. I think he genuinely believes that the bill that he is proposing will work. I take a different view, and we'll have to see, won't we? Is he just being naive? Is he naive? What is this? Well, I don't know. I'm not going to comment on the Prime Minister's motivations. I think he understands the problem. But to me, having seen it at the absolute sharp end, having visited residents of Dover whose homes have been broken into by illegal migrants, having seen the aftermath of riots in Knowsley, where there was a hotel that created immense community issues, having been to North Africa and seen the people smugglers and traffickers in places like Algeria and Tunisia and Libya, I think this is an immense challenge, and not one that's just a fleeting issue. No. It's going to be with us for many decades to come, and I want to insulate the UK from that. That was why I resigned from government. That's why I proposed these amendments.
Are you going to campaign next for us to leave the ECHR?
Well, I think that our membership of the ECHR is unsustainable. I think that will become clearer and clearer to the British public in the months and the years ahead. It was a separate debate from the one we've just had in the House of Commons on the bill, because I don't think we actually have to leave the ECHR to fix the small boats crisis. But it is a debate I think now we do need to engage in as a party for the Conservatives and as a country, and it's one that I want to be at the forefront of.
When you were in the Home Office, I mean, we've heard a lot of this since John Reid was in the helm, actually, and talking about it being a basket case and it's just crazy, and there's even an argument that different departments need to be hived off. It's just too big and unwieldy. What's your impression of it? I mean, do the people working in the Home Office have a grip on immigration, both legal and illegal?
Well, I think it's a bad captain who blames his crew, but it was a department that faced immense challenges, and you saw in recent years some of those issues, like this backlog of cases that grew up, like the appalling waste of taxpayers' money with hotels. I think there is a lack of operational expertise there, because billions of pounds of taxpayers' money is being spent, and you need really good people to be doing the job, bringing in expertise from the private sector, for example, and more accountability as well for officials who get things wrong.
Should we split the Home Office up, do you think?
I think there's a case for doing that and creating a very tough borders department, which is solely focused on securing our borders, stopping illegal migration. But I mean, that's really for another day.
Ideological opposition. Priti Patel spoke about this a bit. You know, she's trying to pull on a lever and then the civil service are pulling on the opposite lever.
I think there's a degree of that, and this is a highly charged issue, but also the web of legal arrangements that we have allowed to rise up over recent years and decades, whether that's the treaties like the ECHR, which are now very out of date. They're all created in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, a very different world, where there was just a few million people on the move. Today there are tens, probably hundreds of millions of people on the move, either fleeing genuine war and persecution or in most cases looking for better economic prospects. And so you need a fundamentally different settlement, both internationally and domestically, to solve that problem. And I'm afraid you do need to embrace the toughest policies if you genuinely want to fix this problem, rather than just dealing with the symptoms.
And yet we read in yesterday's Telegraph that 16,000 asylum seekers who arrived here illegally by boat have been given jobs.
Yes, I think that's wrong. I don't agree that asylum seekers should work. There is a very long-standing policy that dates back to the Labour government in 2005 to allow people who've been here for a year to work in certain occupations where there are supposedly shortages. But it just creates a pull factor to the UK, and almost everyone who comes here is either an economic migrant or a sort of asylum shopper, because they're coming from safe countries like France and choosing to come to the UK because they think life is better here or a softer touch. And so I don't think that's the right approach. There were actually members of Parliament, members of the House of Lords, mostly on the opposition benches, who wanted to reduce that 12 months to just 6 months, and we resisted that. What I did as Minister was double the fines, in fact triple the fines for illegal working, and increase the raids by 50% that are going out to see workplaces like car washes, care homes, nail bars, etc., typical places where illegal migrants can be found working. Because you've got to make the UK less of a soft touch, reduce the pull factor here, so that somebody who is sitting in Germany or France or Belgium doesn't feel the urge to come here to the UK. And if you talk to those countries, like the French, for example, the two of the biggest factors they say drive people to come to the UK are how easy it is to work in the black market here and access to public services like the NHS.
Let's have some clarity, hopefully from you, on legal migration. Should there be a cap on it, and what should it be?
Well, I think that legal migration is in many respects the bigger issue than illegal, because the numbers are so great and the damage it's doing to the country is very significant. It's felt by so many people.
Do we need to go back to tens of thousands, as promised by David Cameron all those years ago?
Well, I'm not sure that an arbitrary target is the right approach, although I'm not averse to it. We'd have to think very carefully about what it is.
Why not?
I definitely,
I mean, that's what people watching and listening to this want.
Well, I want to get it down
cap
to...
the numbers at 200,000,
Well, I certainly think it should be 200,000 or lower each year. Whether or not we get down to tens of thousands, I think you'd have to think carefully about that. But the kind of ballpark that the public want to see is around that level. If you look at the polling, people want to see it in the tens of thousands, and they have no idea quite how many people are coming in. There's a recent poll that came out.
The Home Office doesn't seem to have any idea how many people are coming in.
It has very poor data. But my argument is that it's causing huge damage to the economy, because it means that people and employers are undercutting British workers' wages. They're not investing in technology to improve productivity. It's created a huge issue for housing, an issue that I've campaigned on for many years. And I think the housing crisis today is as much an immigration crisis as it is one about housing.
We've only got a minute left, so a couple more questions for you. You want to see a ban on face coverings at protests. Why?
I do. If you look at those protests, for example, about Gaza in recent months, I think it's completely wrong that people are able to be on the streets wearing masks. It means that it's very hard for the police to arrest them, to hold lawbreakers to account, and it makes many people feel very nervous and uneasy on the streets. It's very intimidating, so I want to see the law changed.
And final question. I've noted that you've lost some weight. You've had a haircut. You're positioning yourself against Rishi Sunak. You seem to be gaining support, particularly among the right of the party. I know you're having conversations with the New Conservatives. Are you lining yourself up to be a future Tory leader?
That's not my intention.
Come on now,
I'm not
politicians are ambitious people.
Well, look, what I am trying to do is to make an argument, and part of that is around illegal migration. I think that for too long, too few politicians have gone and argued that we need to take the most robust action. And so if I can help the Conservative Party by making that argument very strongly, then I will do, because I think there is a path to victory at the next general election, but it goes through taking the strongest possible approach on migration.
Final yes or no question, though. Would you stand as leader in the future?
Honestly, Camilla, I'm not giving that any thought.
So it's not a no, I note.
Well, look, I'm not ruling it out, but that's not my intention here. What I really want to do is make and hopefully win this central argument for the Conservative Party's future.
Robert Jenrick, thank you very much for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Promise, Robert Hardman joins me now. He's a journalist and the author of this new book, Charles III, The Inside Story. And you'll have read about this all week because it's been making waves, it's been making headlines, not just in his own newspaper, the Daily Mail, but across Fleet Street, as we used to call it. Now, let's start, first of all, with the King and the Prince of Wales's health complaints. Were you surprised by how candid, particularly the statement on the King was? I know you've, I think there's a piece about your views on this in the Sunday Times this morning, but I mean, you know, it was admitting that he'd had this enlarged prostate, like many men of his generation. He's going to have this procedure next week. There was a bit more secrecy around the Princess of Wales's admission to the London clinic for this stomach surgery. But at the same time, I mean, do we have a right to know? Should we know? Why are we knowing this stuff?
Well, I think we certainly know more than we would have known in the past. I mean, you know, you and I have been around the royal patch for a while, and to think just a few years ago, you would not have seen the words enlarged prostate in a palace statement. But I think that's sort of a piece with the sort of new tone of this reign. You know, I think the King takes a view, well, you know, the public have a right to know some things, they don't have a right to know everything. But if I'm going to be, you know, if I'm a leader, if I'm setting an example, then if I can do some good by saying what it is that I've got, then encourage other people to step forward. And we've suddenly seen this huge spike in telephone calls to surgeries, online research,
yes,
a number of people looking and looking up, you know, prostate
Do you
issues.
think that came from the King?
Yeah, I think he, you know, he definitely has a sense that, of course, private things must remain private. But again, with the princess, I thought, you know, there was if you like, there was a greater degree of candour about the situation. To have two medical bulletins like that on the same day was pretty remarkable.
Do you think that the King released his statement to take the pressure off the Princess of Wales and all the question marks over what she was going through?
I think we often like to read lots into this. I think, honestly, it was just a case of, I think, you know, she was having her treatment anyway. But I mean, she was in hospital at the time. His followed a checkup. It's really more down to the fact that, you know, when you're royal, if you are going to step out of your duties for a few days, because you have to, that sets in motion an awful lot of cancellations, letting people down. They hate letting people down because they know that every engagement that's on their schedule for the next few weeks, you know, would have been planned to the nth degree for months. And so there are going to be a lot of unhappy people. And you've got to let them know soon before they sort of, you know, start putting out the bunting.
A couple of key revelations in the book. I mean, you piece together in a quite forensic manner, actually, the day that the Queen died. I mean, as far as the information that you've received, and particularly that note that you've managed to find that has been written by Sir Edward Young, her private secretary, she went peacefully, which is of comfort, I think, to the nation. I mean, it's quite important. It's quite something to report.
Well, I wanted to do it as sensitively as possible. You know, there are other aspects of that day that I haven't reported on, and I don't know the full extent, and I don't think it's appropriate that, you know, that should come out. But I think that, you know, there will be this note. It's there lodged for posterity in the Royal Archives, giving the in very short, very terse note form that yes, the established time of her death, but, you know, that she wouldn't have felt anything and that no pain. And I think people will feel, you know, very reassured by that. And I thought the other thing that I absolutely put the hairs on the back of my neck when I heard about it was that her last red box. She'd had a red box brought to her every single day of her life as Queen. She was only ever allowed 2 days off, her birthday and Christmas Day. Other than that, red box every day, full of papers and stuff to be dealt with. And right at the end, you know, they open up her last red box that's there in her room after she's died, and there's a letter to the Prince of Wales, there's a letter to Sir Edward Young, and there's some homework because she was doing the last nominations for the Order of Merit, which she always took extremely seriously. And there was a long list and a medium and a short list, and she had to go through, look at all the biogs and then sort of tick a few. And so those nominations, she did them.
But the letter to Charles, I mean, do we think that that's because she did know that the end was nigh? Do we think that she always had that letter in the red box, maybe for recent months, because she knew she was in ill health?
We don't know. As I say in the book, we'll probably never know what was in it. And I totally understand that. But I think there was certainly a sense of, on those last few days, she really wanted to get the country back on its feet. That's why she was so keen to be on her feet and looking the part.
In that final photograph.
With that final photograph, because, you know, all summer, there hadn't really been a government to speak of.
Yeah.
She knew she had to appoint Prime Minister. Her central role, absolutely number one duty as a constitutional monarch, is ensure the good governance of the country. And so she wanted to appoint Liz Truss, get that done. And obviously that involved, before that, you know, accepting the resignation of Boris Johnson. And she was very buoyed up having done that. That was a weight off her mind.
You quote a senior palace source in the book saying that she was angrier than I've ever seen her over this issue of Harry and Meghan calling their daughter Lilibet. Not so much using her cherished nickname, but the idea that the Sussexes had said that it was done with her permission, and Buckingham Palace said that recollections may vary on that. I mean, some of the headlines said Queen's fury. I mean, was she actually furious, do you think?
I was told she was as angry as this person had ever seen her. And it, as you say, it wasn't the name. I think some people have gone down the route of she was furious about the use of Lilibet. Who knows what the exact how it was sort of broken to her that, you know, we've chosen the name Lilibet. It was the fact that it was then presented that she'd endorsed it, that it had come with her blessing. And then it was the BBC, Johnny Diamond of the BBC, who broke the news that the Queen had not been asked. And at which point, that's when legal action
was
kicked off. Yes, lawyers' letters came from the Sussexes, thrown at anyone who thought they might be about to repeat this calumny. And the Sussexes went to the palace, or their team went to the palace to sort of get there to prop up the story. And there was a rather deafening silence, because the palace was not going to endorse a version of events that didn't tally with what the Queen remembered, and that's what you can't do. You can't. You know, recollections may vary, and if they do, they're not going to budge.
Robert Hardman, thank you very much. You can get his book from all good bookstores. There we are. I'm flashing it up again. Now, as ever, I'll be back next week at 9:30. Michael Portillo, of course, is up next, so stay tuned for that. And if any of you have missed the show today, you can catch up the highlights at 6 p.m. here on GB News. Lovely to see you. Have a great Sunday.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. Storm Isha will bring some very heavy rain and some strong winds across the UK overnight tonight and into Monday morning. It pushes its way north and eastwards across western parts of Scotland this evening, bringing some very heavy rain, particularly to those western parts of the UK. That rain will continue to push its way north and eastwards through the evening and overnight, and it's through the early hours of Monday morning that those winds really start to pick up. Gusts of 60 to 75 miles an hour across those western coasts, perhaps as high as 90 across parts of Scotland. It will be a very mild night as well, particularly compared to what we've seen recently, maybe 8 or 9 degrees across the southeast. A very windy start to the day on Monday, though. Those winds will ease a touch through the early hours of the morning, but still remaining very blustery across the UK into Monday afternoon. Showers quite widely pushing in from the west into Monday afternoon as well, perhaps turning wintry across the very high ground of Scotland. There will be some sunshine across the very far southeast. Temperatures here maybe 10 or 11 degrees, and elsewhere around the mid-single figures. Tuesday will start a little bit drier for some, particularly along eastern parts of England, but that doesn't last very long. This next system pushing in from the west as we go through Tuesday afternoon, bringing some further heavy rain, particularly to western parts of Scotland, northwest England and into Wales as well, and some strong winds associated with that. Something a little drier on Wednesday, but further wet and windy weather later in the week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on